Welcome back to the Capital Confidential podcast from the Times-Union and the Hearst Corporation. I'm Dan Clark, author of the Capital Confidential newsletter. The race for state comptroller in New York usually isn't very exciting, but it's an important job. The state comptroller oversees state spending and the public pension fund, which incumbent state comptroller Tom DiNapoli said was valued at about $284 billion in August. But one of his challengers says it could have been larger with a different approach. Drew Warshaw is with me now. He's one of the Democrats running against DiNapoli this year. Drew, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So we are in one of the Times-Union's offices at the state capitol. So you are here in Albany, where you would be if you are elected as comptroller. I want to talk about your report, but how does this feel to you to be in this capitol?
Oh, it feels great. I mean, this is where the people's business is done, and that's what I want to be doing.
Exactly. I would hope so if you're running for this job. So let's talk about this report, because I think it's very comprehensive. And as you were telling reporters this morning, myself included, this is kind of the first time that somebody has, quote, audited the auditor in that way. The big takeaway from your report is that, according to your math, the Common Retire Fund underperformed by about 39%. Tell me, if I'm a person just in the state, what does that translate to? What does that mean?
Sure. Well, first, what it translates into is $59.1 billion of New Yorkers' taxes taken out of their pocket to subsidize Tom DiNapoli's and his bankers' underperformance. So that's literally what it translates into. It is a massive... The 39% underperformance translates into a $59.1 billion DiNapoli tax. And that is additional property and income taxes that have to get taken out of New York taxpayers' pockets in order to subsidize for DiNapoli's and his bankers' underperformance. And Dan, you're exactly right. In 18 years, no one has ever quantified the performance of the third largest fund manager in the United States of America. And it's kind of extraordinary that no one's ever done that. And we finally did. And as you pointed out, we finally audited the auditor.
Can you describe for people how that translates to a tax? Because some people may think the comptroller's office could set a tax or something like that, which is not the case in this case. So are we talking about taxes that wouldn't be there if Tom DiNapoli had a different approach? Are we talking about taxes that would still be there but could be used for something else?
Sure. So he does set tax rates because he asked the 3,000 municipalities that are public employers to fund the pension fund. Okay. And who funds them? Taxpayers do.
Right.
It's a pass-through. And the pension fund is funded by three sources of revenue. It's just three. One is public employees, and that's fixed by law. So whether the market goes up or goes down, same amount every year. Second is by investment income. So how good is the state comptroller at investing those funds? And if those two things do not equal the benefit stream that has to get paid, then taxpayers have to make up the difference. And so this is why this job is so critical, because there is a one-to-one relationship between Tom DiNapoli's underperformance over the last 18 years and our tax bill. And had he performed 39% better, which is just how his own benchmarks would have performed, his market benchmarks, what he said, what he defines success and says, measure me by this. So we did. We actually measured him by his own benchmarks, and he underperformed those benchmarks by 39%. And so instead of getting the investment income from the investments because he underperformed, taxpayers had to make up that difference. And so he went out to 3,000 employers, i.e., the Nassau County and Albany County and the city of Buffalo and the school district of North Tonawanda and so on and so forth. And he said, we need more money because we're short on investment income. And it's really just a balancing equation. And because the state's public pension fund legally has to be fully funded, taxpayers had to make up that difference. And over the last 18 years, this is one of the largest wealth transfers that no one knows anything about, from ordinary taxpayers to hundreds of bankers that he paid, He paid $11.3 billion in fees to, taxpayer-funded fees, for them to not do their job.
Well, so people probably don't understand how that works with the pension fund. So you have in your report that the Comptroller's office tripled the number of managers, if I'm reading it correctly.
That's right.
And these are people who are making these investment decisions on Wall Street. Is that what they do?
That's right. So these Wall Street bankers go to DiNapoli and the pension fund, and they say, we are so good at investing. We're so good at picking stocks and so on and so forth. Give us these high fees because we're going to do something really special. We're going to not just beat the market, not just beat our own benchmark, our own index, but we're going to beat it so good that we are going to not only outperform it, but pay for our fees, these big fees that you're paying us. And so we looked and we said, did they do that? Did they actually fulfill their promise? And they didn't even come close. And on the first day of business school, they teach us that it is next to impossible to beat the market net of fees. And over the last 18 years, Tom DiNapoli proved that to the T.
And your report says in 2025 alone, 14 cents of every tax dollar paid into the fund went towards management fees, which is a large amount. So how would you change it? What would your approach be? You told us that you would get rid of all of these managers. So what does that look like from an investment standpoint?
Yes, sure. So Dan, if you and I and the listeners, if we didn't do our job for 18 years, we'd be fired. We wouldn't continue to get billions of dollars of taxpayer-funded fees. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to fire the 664 bankers that Tom DiNapoli pays billions of dollars of taxpayer-funded fees to every year because they simply have not performed. They have not done their job. And we are going to replace them with a set of diversified low-cost index funds, which are available to retail investors and certainly to the third largest public pension fund in the United States. And it's that simple.
How do you choose which index funds to go with? For me, when I'm choosing index funds, I have no idea what I'm doing. They kind of have little descriptions on, like, I use Fidelity, for example. I'm assuming the Comptroller's office is not going to be using Fidelity. So how do you navigate and choose which funds to invest in there?
You diversify across a set of asset classes. So whether it's domestic public equities, international public equities, fixed income, and the like. And that's how you think about your portfolio allocation. And that's the thing, Dan. Asset allocation predicts something like 93.4% of a portfolio's return. And that is, since the dawn of modern finance is the general rule of thumb. And so Tom DiNapoli has spent billions of dollars of our tax money on trying to get somehow this last sort of 6%, trying to beat the market and hire all these investment managers. And he's hired literally all of them, 664 of them. So I don't know how careful he was about selecting them. Clearly not that careful because they underperformed by 39%. But he literally, basically created a gigantic index fund. It's just he got the worst of both worlds, where he paid all these active management fees and he underperformed the market anyway.
So how, if I don't know if you actually quantified this in your report, and it's okay if you didn't, but if we had taken that approach during Tom DiNapoli's tenure, how much larger would the pension fund be? Do we know?
We did, and it's one of the findings. I think there are 10 findings in this 51-page report, and I think the first finding is that the public pension fund would have been $107 billion larger than it is today. $107 billion. And that's basically just that return, that overperformance of the market as compared to what he did, just compounded over and over and over again. But in real life, that would never happen. You wouldn't overfund the pension fund to the tune of $107 billion. And that's why we did the calculation to understand, okay, instead of overfunding the pension fund, which wouldn't happen in real life, let's ask taxpayers for less money. So we simulated that over 18 years. And we said, how much less tax dollars have to come out of New Yorkers' pockets in the middle of an affordability crisis. How much less do we actually need? And it turns out that number was $59.1 billion of fewer taxes that we needed to fully fund the public pension fund.
It's a lot of money. And I imagine you probably can't quantify it per person, can you?
It's $5,500 per New York family.
Okay, so on average, $5,500 over the past 18 years.
That's right.
That could have been the down payment for my car.
Yeah. And that's the tragedy here is the investors of this fund. These aren't a bunch of rich people. These are taxpayers.
Right.
These are public school teachers. These are firefighters, cops, frontline government workers. That's who's invested in this fund. And so when the fund doesn't do well, we have to take this deadly seriously because it impacts New Yorkers' wallets, like one-to-one relationship. And that is what happened here. Over the last 18 years, Tom DiNapoli paid a bunch of bankers $11.3 billion in taxpayer-funded fees for them to not do their job. And he wants to do this another 4 years. And that was another thing we calculated. If he were to replicate his historic underperformance for another 4 years, it would cost New York taxpayers an additional $13.1 billion. We quite literally cannot afford another 4 more years.
I want to continue with the report, but I want to read you a statement that I read you before we started recording from his campaign, and I want you to respond to it. This is from DiNapoli's campaign manager, Dan Pereira, and I won't read the whole thing because it's all kind of the same point, but he says, quote, "This report is full of basic math errors and is proposing a plan that would risk the retirement of more than 1 million working families, retirees, and public employees." And then he goes on to say that the pension is virtually fully funded. And then he also says that using shoddy math, as he calls it, is the politics of Donald Trump, and New Yorkers are sick of it. That's his quote. That's his saying, not mine. So
sure.
How would you respond?
Yeah, there's a lot to break down there.
Yeah.
I don't know where Donald Trump comes into the equation, but I suppose if they just say it, they get a certain reaction. But let's leave Donald Trump out of this. I think there are 2 issues with his statement. One, he talks about math errors. Where are they? Show them to me. What are the math errors? We put out a 51-page report, and they put out a campaign spokesperson. We shouldn't have a campaign spokesperson responding to a 51-page report that shows our work. We should have someone from the state comptroller's office who does this for a living responding. So if they want to show math errors, be specific, because we were.
They would be auditing the auditor of the auditor.
Yeah. So that's what I would say first. Second, don't let this fear mongering, and if you want to talk about the politics of Donald Trump, that's the politics of fear. And what was that response? That response was, you should be scared because he's going to put your pension money at risk. And this is one of the untold stories over the last 18 years. And I want to be very clear about this to the nearly 1.25 million public employees who are in this pension fund. Their pension fund is guaranteed by the New York State Constitution. It is the law to have the public pension fund fully funded. That is not Tom DiNapoli's doing, or certainly not this campaign spokesperson's doing. So that is the law. So that has to be done. The question is, how is it going to be fully funded? That is the question that has not been answered until we put out this report. And it turns out the way this pension fund is fully funded is despite Tom DiNapoli's investment record. It's not because of it. It is because 11 million New York taxpayers made certain it was fully funded. It was because 11 million working New Yorkers paid $59.1 billion more than they had to in order to make certain that the 1.25 million public employees out there have their retirement secure.
This is a comprehensive report, and we're going to keep on talking about it, but first we need to take a quick break.
In July of 1908, America was transfixed by the murder of a young woman in upstate New York.
Either Hazel came down here alive or dead. We don't know.
Oh,
I think she was alive.
She was found floating in a country pond, her death shrouded in mystery, her killer unknown. Was she murdered by a spurned lover Was she leading a secret double life outside of her station as a governess to the wealthy residents of Troy, New York? Did she know too many secrets?
She was obviously trying to create a better life for herself, and she knew how to maneuver to make it work for her, and it worked until it didn't.
In this new limited series podcast from the Times Union, we'll go back in time to an era of wealth and prosperity, of rampant political corruption, and of secrets and lies in upstate New York. We'll unravel the mystery of the life and death of one young woman, and why her story still resonates more than a century later.
'Tis the last rose of summer left blooming alone.
Listen to The Girl in the Pond at timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are faded and gone, no flower.
And we are back on the Capitol Confidential podcast with Drew Warshaw. He's a Democrat running for state controller. So just finishing up talking about this report, the pension fund is one part of the job of controller, but I think it's a huge part of the job for it. You have switching to index funds, firing these managers that are doing it right now. Is there anything else with the pension fund that you would want to change or I'm not necessarily thinking of risk, but are there any other strategies that you would want to use to bolster its financial security or leverage it?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, Dan. One thing, and before running for state controller, I ran the largest affordable housing nonprofit in the country, Enterprise Community Partners. And to me, if you can't afford a safe and decent home that provides value and doesn't suck value and allows you to live the life you want to live, very, very little else comes after that. And I have proposed taking $10 billion of this fund and starting the largest housing fund in the United States. And he has unilateral control over this fund, as we know. He could have done this yesterday. He could have done this at any point over the last 18 years. And we are in a raging affordability crisis. And housing is the number one driver of that crisis. And it's not just a New York City problem. It is an everywhere problem.
Oh, yeah.
And he has the ability to help address that crisis. And he has done nothing. And we are going to take $10 billion and we are going to invest that money in homes that New Yorkers can afford. I've done this. This is what we did for a living. We know this is possible. We can earn a reasonable risk-adjusted rate of return well north of DiNapoli's target return of 5.9% and help address the fact that New Yorkers cannot afford to live in New York.
How does that relate to the constitutional requirement that it be fully funded? With that $10 billion, does it remain part of the fund and that counts as being fully funding it, or do you take it out and then you have to replace that $10 billion?
No. This would be an investment like any other. It would earn a rate of return like any other. And currently he has $30 billion of money invested in real estate. It's just he has it invested in real estate private equity and hedge funds and not in housing that New Yorkers can afford. And that would be the main difference.
Can you, for somebody like me who is not very experienced in investment versus everything like that, how do you get a return on housing?
Sure. So, housing, like any real asset, any piece of infrastructure, this is, I think, the most important piece of infrastructure because people live in it. But just like any piece of infrastructure, it costs a lot of money up front, and then that money gets paid back over time through revenue or rental income, for example. And so investors pay a bunch of money up front to basically buy the right to receive revenue in the future. And that's essentially how real estate gets financed.
So would you take the $10 billion and then do you make it directly available to developers, or do you like put it through a bank as a fiscal intermediary?
Yeah, we would. The $10 billion would be likely a combination of equity and debt.
Okay.
So sort of equity and fixed income in terms of the sort of two big groupings that the pension fund is invested in, and we would make that available to people who are going to build and preserve homes that New Yorkers can afford, and they would actually have a source of capital that they don't have to go to the governor or legislature for, or their mayor for. They could actually go to the New York State Comptroller, and they could have done that all along. It's just we've had someone for 18 years who did not prioritize affordable housing, doesn't even believe he can or we should. And as someone who spent the last 5 years trying to address the affordable housing crisis at this nonprofit, we should, and when I'm state comptroller, we absolutely will.
Housing is one of everybody's top costs, top concerns. And I think it's one of the top issues in politics right now, especially in New York. The argument that supply will bring costs down is a very strong one, I think. What are your other kind of big top issues that you see as important to New Yorkers? Because I don't want people to think that because you're coming from a housing nonprofit, you're going to focus solely on housing, unless you are.
Yeah, well, look, housing is going to be an absolute priority, and I've talked about other ways we can address the housing crisis, like auditing the building code of New York City and New York State to help bring down construction costs, which is not something that has ever been done before, and we absolutely have the ability to do it. Again, he could have done this over the last 18 years. We're going to do this in our first year. But I also have experience in renewable energy. I spent 8 years building solar farms all across the country. And one of the things that is breaking the backs of New Yorkers right now, it's housing costs, and it's childcare, and it's utility costs.
Yeah.
And it's the costs of our electricity and gas bills that keep going up and up and up, and our service keeps going down and down and down. And I was in the electricity business for 8 years, and we built solar farms, and we had to work with these utility monopolies to try and connect to the grid, and they are a nightmare. And we had to work with the Public Service Commission, which is the sole regulator of these utility monopolies. Mm-hmm. And I said back in the summer that one of the first audits I will do is we will audit the Public Service Commission and the Department of Public Service and get to the bottom of the utility monopoly's broken business model that is crushing New Yorkers in ever higher electric and gas rates. And it's totally unacceptable. It's an admission of failure, and we can do something about it. And I actually have experience in this industry, and that is something that we are going to bring to bear in this role.
Some Democrats in the legislature want to flip the entire energy system on its head and say, why don't we just take this all over from the utilities? If we're going to give them monopolies, why don't we just be the monopoly? What do you think about that?
I think that that is a response that comes from an understandable sense of desperation. That comes from a vacuum and void of leadership. And when you have a state comptroller who has nearly 3,000 people who work for him and has not done a top to bottom audit of this broken utility model and hasn't been able to give the public or the legislators for that matter, or the governor for that matter, a roadmap and a sense of what we can do to fix this utility process, it's understandable that, and the natural response will be, well, we should just burn it all down and try something completely different because we know this isn't working. And they're not wrong. It's not working. And right now we don't have the person calling balls and strikes who has all the resources to be able to address this, just none of the experience. And that's something that I can uniquely bring to this office.
Do you think that doing that kind of audit on the PSC, looking at these utility companies, which are very powerful politically, do you think that creates any tension within your party of people who may not have that interest?
You know who's powerful? 19 million New Yorkers.
Yeah.
And that's who I represent. That's who I work for. Those are the only powerful people I care about. And so that's all I have to say about that.
I think we're going to be reaching this point in politics in 2026 where there's like this faction of the Democrat Party, like looking at the left and then the moderate and whatever. Where are you in that? Do you identify as part of that spectrum, and where would you identify as on that spectrum?
to me, I don't think it's sort of left, right, center. Maybe it was at one point. I think right now it is, are you using the power and the money that you have to address the needs of New Yorkers? Are you using that power and that money to make their lives better and easier to live? Because life is hard enough. Is government doing what it needs to do to make it a bit easier? To me, that's the only spectrum that matters.
So I think we'll leave it there because this is going to be a long campaign and I'd love to have you back. So I don't want to waste all my questions now.
Thank you, Dan. A pleasure to be here.
Drew Warshaw, candidate for state controller. And if you want to learn more about what's going on in New York government, you can sign up for the Capital Confidential newsletter. Find that at capitalconfidential.com. That's capital with an O, not an A. That's capital with an O. Thanks to the TU and the Hearst Corporation for continuing to take a chance on us. Our theme music for now is Easy Hike by DM. Our editor is Jessica Marshall. We'll see you next time. Be well.